She's in the. I don't know if I want to say that on camera. And then Rico has another comment. I don't know if I want to say that on camera either. It's July 3rd. Happy Independence Day, everyone. Thank you for taking a break from your holiday and joining us. This is the Annex Suspension Instagram Live. Rico says he just bought a 240Z.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So for today's Instagram Live, we have some questions for you guys, but for the overall topic of this episode, the question comes from gbo510. That's our customer Gabriel, and he asks, hey, I think a good live topic would be how to set up and tune dampers / springs and links. It would be a pretty long to have one comprehensive session, but doing one on rear dampers, rear wheel drive, or something like that. So
I just want to say thanks to Gabe for this topic suggestion, because we liked enough that this is going to be our main topic for today. So just to reiterate for you guys, when we're asking for topics, we are looking at everything that you guys are submitting, and we want to talk about what you guys want us to talk about. So thanks again for replying back to our questions and letting us know what you guys want to hear about. And one other thing I think is funny is we're going to maybe exceed Gabe's expectations. He was asking us to talk about setting dampers on one end of the vehicle, but we don't want to leave you guys hanging, so we're going to cover the entire vehicle in this. So we'll give ourselves enough time for that.
Rico has a question before we get started. You have old school setups for 240Z?
No, not at this time, but we are interested in that.
Yeah, more and more. Directly, I think 3 people have at least come into this building asking for a 240Z because apparently there hasn't been that good of a setup on the market right now.
Yeah, I think most people are adapting 240SX dampers, which is a car that's 30 years newer than the 240Z. So yeah, this sounds like an application that could use some of that Annex 11.
Hello, Victoria finally joined us. WNBA STI. Another problem with the 240Z, I think you have to cut and weld. Same thing that used to be an old problem way back in the day on 886 coilovers, was that you had to cut and weld your old spindles because nobody made a bolting option. So, I mean, that's another hurdle for developing for the 240Z chassis.
Yeah, definitely. And there's different ways that you can solve that, but there's at least one company on the market that's making bespoke spindles for these cars. And we are also talking to them to see if they can match those with our dampers. So I think that kind of collab would make it a lot easier to have a good product for the 240Z.
So we have 15 people on the live stream right now. Thank you all for joining us. Today's topic, how would you sum up today's topic?
Yeah, today's topic, we're going to talk about suspension setup and tuning in terms of how to set the dampers as well as the sway bar end links and things like that. So you could think of it as, I just got my suspension, I put it on. Where do I go from there?
Nate.allen.dt says, sponsor me. First of all, Nate, what chassis do you drive? Because that'll pique our interest if you drive an interesting chassis or something we already carry. And T-Yoda86 says, big shout out to all the AE86 owners, which happens to be like 3/4 of our staff. So thank you. All right. So while we wait for, Nate says AE86 coupe. We'll think about it, Nate. Shoot us a DM after this and we'll think about it. But we appreciate your support on the live stream. Thank you, man. So while we get your guys' live questions, why don't we answer some of the questions asked ahead of time? So why don't you read off the first question from Kabanana Chance?
Yeah. Okay. So this person asks, are suspension rebuilds worth the time and money? And actually, we also wanted to pose a question for you guys on that one. We wanted to hear what your guys' experiences were with suspension rebuilds. We're curious, as a company that provides these services, have you guys had your suspension rebuilt? What was that like? We don't need to know any company names. We just kind of want to know what was it like, what kind of turnarounds, what kind of services were offered. It'll help us to understand how we can better provide us those kind of services for you guys as well, if that's ever needed. But so the question: are suspension rebuilds worth the time and money? I think that depends on how you're going to be using the suspension. If you are mainly driving through the canyons and are, driving to work and aren't putting the suspension through so much abuse, our Fast Road Pro product is very durable in terms of the shim stacks are quality, and they're less likely to bend than some other materials they're using shock absorbers. The fluids are meant for a for long term use, and we have not experienced leaks from our shock absorbers over time. Now, that being said, although you may not need to rebuild the shocks in a short time frame, it is often worthwhile to do a rebuild to keep that suspension working as long as it possibly can. And there's a couple reasons for this. Primarily, I'd say the biggest reason would be to make sure that fluid is fresh. The fluid can actually pick up water over time, much like your brake fluid can in a car. And that's another reason why you want to change fluids like brake fluid in a car, because that water will get into the shock over time just by picking it up through the atmosphere. And that water can wreak havoc on the steel components that are inside a shock absorber over time. So if you want your shocks to be performing the best, the most important thing is to probably change the fluid out. I would say, maybe at least every 3 or 4 years for the most, long-term use. And this can really depend on the type of application, because there's racers out there that will actually change the fluid after every race to make sure that the fluid is chemically consistent in terms of like the molecules actually have not been sheared apart from the heat and force that race dampers go through. So again, it kind of depends on the application that you're going to be using the shocks.
My face peeked up because Rob just asked a very long question. Depends how blown, what's wrong with it, how far off is it, etc.
Oh.
Like you said, depending on internal quality, I noticed a big change when rebuilding buddy clubs. Didn't notice a big difference.
So he's saying that he did not notice a big difference?
We need to clarify your question, Rob, because we're really curious about this now.
Yeah, or actually another question is, how do you know if your dampers are blown, right? What are some of the telltale signs? I would say that if you have the dampers set at a consistent, setting, let's say you normally drive at 10 clicks from full stiff on your dampers. If you're starting to notice that the shocks are getting a little wobbly in the sense that the car, when it hits a bump, it kind of feels like it's not quite rebounding at the same speed. As long as there's not something else wrong with your car, that could be a good indication that the shock absorbers are starting to lose their prime. One shock or more could be losing force compared to the other ones. So that's one way you can feel inside a car. Another way you can tell is if you're actually seeing some leaking around the shock shaft. It is normal to have a little bit of oil on the shock shaft, especially for some of the racier suspensions out there that have looser tolerances to have the least amount of friction. But if you're starting to see it weep down the actual shock body, where you can see physical droplets, that's probably a good sign that you're losing fluid. And even then, the shock may not stop working entirely. You still have some reserve of fluid on there, but eventually that nitrogen is going to keep pushing that fluid out of the shock until you can start introducing air into the shock. And you'll certainly notice it then when the shims are no longer touching fluid inside the shock body.
Rob, you got to clarify this one more time. So I noticed a big change when rebuilding buddy clubs. Didn't notice a big difference when, and then it cuts off. So Rob, we really want to get your question answered. So I'm sorry, man. Type that one more time.
I guess at least the end, right?
Yeah, at least the end.
Interesting.
One thing I noticed for who's joining us right now, we have a lot of 8.6 Drive Challenge drivers.
Oh, really? Nice.
And so Jimmy, SI, 8.6 Drive Challenge, whoever handles that account joined us. Chef Jeff, of course. And for you guys don't know, 8.6 Drive Challenge and 8.6 Cup is a ZN6, ZC6 only club spec series that we have in California. And actually, Grant will be there on Sunday at Laguna Seca.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, July 5th, Laguna Seca. You can meet Grant in real life. Delta Joker CTR. If you guys want to do some R&D on an FK8, I'll be out of the country for 6 months at the end of August.
FK8. Okay.
So it's a CTR.
Oh, CTR. Okay.
The newest CTR. Yeah, Delta Joker CTR
nice.
said earlier, I'm down to
That'd be
get
cool.
your suspension when available for FK8 Type R.
Yeah, that'd be a fun one. We seem to be getting more and more into front-wheel drive Hondas, so that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like FK8 or the CTR and then the Supra, similar, like a lot of, because there was so much hype when those cars were getting announced, a lot of companies immediately jumped on to get an application out.
Yeah.
But then we found out the after effects, right? Like those systems did not completely work as they should, or did not completely work with the rest of the electronics on the car.
Do you mean like mainly it was like electronics problems with those cars, or was it more like the shocks weren't like comfortable or didn't have enough stroke or something like that?
So two things. The electronics weren't all there because we know the Supra and the CTR need cancelers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, which we talked about on a previous episode of the live, we saw the one CTR 3-wheel in and out of the driveway, which, yeah, there's a severe problem with that if you're picking wheels off the ground in a street setting.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, you know, sometimes I think sometimes in a rush to meet the release of a new vehicle, I think sometimes products can be rushed to the market a little bit. And I think it's understandable. I think if you have a brand new car and you want to start modding right away, I think it's reasonable to expect that there may be improvements on the products, over time. And CTR has been out for a little while now. I think they even have like a facelift based on an auto show video that I saw. So even though like to us it seems like the car just came out, but I think time kind of moves by us here since we work so much. And turn around, next thing I know, there's like a facelift on a brand new car. I'm like, whoa, where did the time go?
Yeah, I remember, because I have a CTR customer, and I remember looking at the VIN. It was like 15, 16 CTR. I was like, wow, they made those? It's been 4 or 5 years already?
Wow, that's crazy.
All right, so Destiny the S2K. Thank you for reiterating, Rob. I noticed a big difference when I had my Buddy Clubs rebuilt versus not a big difference when I had my KW V3s rebuilt.
Interesting.
Imagine it was more due to internal quality of the shock.
Interesting. Yeah. So again, you guys don't feel pressured to mention any brand names. But I can definitely see that we noticed that some shocks coming out of Asia can use shims that are not prone to last as long as shims that are typically European made. So that could be one contributing factor. If the shim, some of you guys have been here for our seminar last year. If the shims bend even just the smallest amount, we're talking 0.01 or 0.02 millimeters, that can have a big impact on the amount of force that the shock is developing, especially if it's a preloaded shim stack like our CSP or some of our Fastwood Pro applications. And when I say preloaded, I mean where you're actually bending the shim ahead of time to force it to build up more force before it blows off. That can put a lot of stress on the shims that are cycling, thousands and tens of thousands of times as the car is going throughout its life cycle. And if you don't have the best material on there, or if you use shims that are even not the right thickness and diameter for the application, you can bend them over time. And we'll admit, like we've had our own experiences with that. We have a car that's driving great. We're like, okay, awesome, let's send it. And then on our test route, one of our test routes, we'll drive it on some really bumpy freeway, out in the Bay Area where there's like some large bumps at speed, or we'll test the car like and hit berms of the track. We've noticed after releasing the car from our R&D session, it wasn't driving the same, shortly after, like within the first week. We're like, okay, that's weird. Put the shock back on the dyno, and you find that it's lost 10 or 15% of the force, and like, okay, that's more than an actual break-in. And so we'll take it apart and we'll see that, okay, there's a shim that has slightly bent and we need to figure out why. So solving those kind of problems is what I think we kind of strive for to try to get a long lasting shock. And so that, that kind of goes back to, when is it worthwhile to rebuild the shock absorbers, especially in that case where you found a marked difference in performance. Then sounds like that was money well spent, right? Or if the shock kind of feels pretty similar to how it did when you first got it, if it's long-lasting materials and nothing's leaking, then maybe you don't need it. Maybe you can just keep driving it for a while.
Ricky BRZ just joined us, and that is Mr. Riku, who Joe's Average Coaching, Joe McGuigan, actively coaches Riku. So, Mr. Riku, if you're going to be at Laguna Seca with 8-6 Drive Challenge on Sunday, you can meet Grant in real life.
Say hi.
And the Peter Parker. Peter is our newest intern or volunteer here at night at Annex Suspension. He's also joined us. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the hard work so far, Parker. Burstcraft says, front-wheel drive Honda gets mentioned and nobody asks about DC5 yet? That's a miracle. I was going to say, this would not be the Annex Suspension live if someone did not bring up DC5. So, and then Destiny the S2K Rob says, at Burstcraft, I run their setup on my FA5 and it's magical. All right. Victoria's been awfully quiet during this live, but we have 3 questions from Victoria. So why don't we get to her first question?
Well, so first question she has is, and again, Victoria, we really appreciate your input on these live streams. It's always makes us feel good when we see you join in, because we know it's always fun to answer your questions that you have. First question is, when's the next event that we'll be attending? Like Ezekiel said, I will be out essentially since COVID is starting to die down, in the sense that we're able to go out and start going to the track and stuff. I wanted to meet up with our 8-6 Drive Challenge racers and customers and just kind of see how things have been for them and kind of get back into the groove of going back to and doing motorsport activities. So I won't be driving, but I will be out there at Laguna Seca this Sunday. And yeah, if you guys see me there, definitely say hi. I'd love to meet you in person. And the next event that we'll be driving in, I think, is going to be Laguna again, but August 22nd. Ezekiel and I will both have our old Toyota Corollas there, and we'll be driving that event. So if you guys want to get some track time, we encourage you to sign up while there's still space. I think that event is going to be selling out pretty soon.
Yeah, I think Point Buy Group's actually already sold out.
Wow.
Yeah, Laguna events always sell out fast. Not only will 2 Corollas be there, but 3 red Corollas will be there because Chris Van, also on the R&D team, is already signed up with me. Potentially 4 old cars, because Jeff Wolfson in his Time Attack EG6 Civic may join us if he remembers to sign up on time.
That's right. We got to ping him. I'm hoping he does come out, because Jeff and I have been kind of talking shit to each other to see which one of our old cars is going to be faster.
Ricky BRZ, Mr. Riku, says, unfortunately, I couldn't register. It filled up so fast. I'll be at Laguna August 22nd and 23rd. Yes, Laguna fills up really fast. I know you just started going to the track, but Laguna always fills up fast. And yeah, at least 2 months ahead of time, you got to register. But luckily, we will be there August 22nd, so we look forward to meeting you, Mr. Riku. Red X Joey says, 5? With a winky eye. Why, Joey? Are you going to be there too? Don't leave us in suspense. All right. So, Wannabe STI Victoria asks, what's your favorite platform that you guys have worked on so far?
Yeah, this question comes up sometimes, and it's always fun for us to kind of reminisce on some of the projects that we really enjoyed. MRS always comes back to the forefront. We've had a couple customers here, Joe McGuigan with a CSP application for his MRS, who's a recent dad, by the way. So congrats to Joe and Rebecca, and we're glad the delivery was safe for you guys. So major step for Joe. And we also had another customer with a 2ZZ 6-speed swapped MRS that we developed Fast Road Pro on, and both cars were a blast. It's those I think the weights on those cars here was something like 2,150 pounds for a stock 2002 or so Toyota.
both of those cars had cages in them too.
Oh, it had roll bars in
And
them.
then Vince's MRS had a full interior, so that's like
Yeah,
fully loaded wet car, 2,100 pounds.
with a roll bar,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing. So you can definitely feel that that lack of mass. And I don't know if you guys have seen that meme circulating recently, but there's a meme where you see the wheelbase of an MRS and the wheelbase of an S2000, and I think the MRS actually has a longer wheelbase than the MRS. And so what that means to me as a chassis engineer is that the polar moment or the amount of inertia on that vehicle when it's turning is very low. You've got the wheels all the way out at the edges of the car, and all of the mass is at the center. So that car can transition like crazy, at least on paper. But I think that's what people are finding at the track as well. And on top of that, the suspension is relatively simple. It's just four struts, one on each corner. Very easy to work on. It was easy to develop. Yeah, that car was a blast. And I've got a couple other top picks too. We had an S14 in here, which was admittedly not my favorite car that we worked on, but it did allow us to validate our calculator at the time, because in the early days, we would just have some drivers drive around in the cars and get some subjective feedback on the dampers as we did tuning. And it was a very slow, tedious process of building shocks, testing on the dyno, putting them on the car, getting feedback, taking them off, taking them apart, change the shims, et cetera. And so we would do this maybe 10 times on a car, even more. And when we finally got to the point where we got some help from a physicist, basically, to help us go through with the calculator, we were able to start trusting that input, and that has been a game changer, because now we can make the dampers exactly how we want with math. And so that was the first car that we applied that calculator to, and it was pretty amazing, because I remember we signed off on the valving on the S14, and we were quite happy with it. And then we got the calculator running like around the same time frame, put that info into the calculator, and it was saying, oh, you should put in 20% more rebound on the front. And we're thinking like, no, it feels great. I can't imagine wanting to do that, right? And we're like, you know what? There's only one way to test this thing. So we did exactly that. We followed our calculator to the T, and lo and behold, the car was way flatter and with no drawbacks. It felt way better, and that was a huge light bulb moment for us. Since then, we've had to put more time and energy into the calculator to fine tune it, especially for a race product. But that was a pivotal chassis for us. And then finally. The FRS is always fun, because we work with that race group and we have a lot of experience with that car, and it also has really good attributes that make it good for handling.
Counter column says, sup, it's Alex R. Do you know who Alex R is? I'm sorry, man. I'm really sorry. Alex, you gotta remind us who you are, man. I'm so sorry, because we like a flood of people come in and out of this building. So I'm really sorry, man. But if you have a question, make sure to ask a question on the live stream. For you guys just joining us, we are doing a Instagram live, and we are talking about setup and tuning of dampers, springs, and links on all four corners. Victoria says, lol. Aw, yeah, sorry about that. All right, so Victoria, since you will answer your question right now. Does suspension hurt the chassis at all compared to stock?
I would say it can. It definitely can. So first of all, just removing and replacing suspension has its own risk, as you guys know. If you install it and you damage something on the car when putting it back in, that's never fun. But especially if you have a suspension that wasn't designed properly in terms of maybe the bump stop heights weren't engineered in a way to be effective, or there's not quite enough stroke on the suspension, so the shocks are constantly topping out and putting a really sharp amount of impact onto the chassis where it mounts. That can also cause some issues. But even if it's set up properly, when you have a higher spring rate and a stiffer shock on a vehicle, it is going to put more wear on the chassis. And it's been really fun working with the 86 Drive Challenge guys, because they are so meticulous about those cars, and they know the ins and outs of them, because it's a spec class race and they need to know every advantage. Some of them have talked about changing chassis after a season or two of racing, because they can feel the difference that the chassis has in terms of slop and how rigid that chassis is after racing. So yeah, if you have a really stiff shock package and stiff spring rates on a car, it can eventually put some wear on it. So oftentimes it's good to pick the spring rate that you need and not go beyond that. So for example, if you're driving on the street, I think something like our Fast Red Pro would be better for the longevity of your car and maybe yeah, and I think that helps over time.
A lot of times we forget about a lot of the compromises with modern cars, how they have to meet crash safety, EPA regulations. So a lot of times these chassis sacrifice some rigidity or some weight in order to meet the newer regulations that are so stringent that modern cars have to have.
Mm-hmm.
And we also talked about on the previous live about the chassis itself as part of the suspension.
Yeah, that's right.
Mr. John over at JSP Fab asks, have you guys ever tested helper springs on the AE86?
Well, yes, we have, John. Our Club Spec Pro setup that Josh Iroku is running in Global Time Attack has helper springs on all four corners on the 86. In general, helper springs are really important when you have a racing spring rate where the spring doesn't deflect very much when you put the car on the ground, because you want to make sure you have as much droop travel as you can. And we've mentioned this repeatedly on the podcast, on the live stream, but it's really important. If you have a race spring rate on your car and you put it on the ground, that spring doesn't deflect very much. That means the shock is not compressing very much. That also means the shock cannot decompress or have droop as much as you need to try to keep all four tires on the ground. So although I think oftentimes people believe that the helper spring is there to just keep the spring on its perch, that is a good benefit, but in our opinion, that's not nearly the most important part. The most important part is getting the droop out of the suspension to get the max amount of grip that you need.
By the way, if you guys are looking for helper springs by themselves, a different spring rate option, our website, thank you to our media person, Stephanie, is getting updated more and more by the day. So if you are not in the market for coilovers, but maybe you want to change spring rate, maybe you have some basic coilovers that actually need helper springs, we have them all ready to go for you. So please check out the website, shoot us a DM. You can shoot any of us an email, any questions. We probably got it for you.
We actually have the website up on the background, but yeah, please let us know. It's still a work in progress, but you can definitely check out the springs and other accessories like the FRS extended top hats, 86 extended top hats. Those kinds of accessories are on the store now, and we'll be adding more of the stuff that we've created onto the store in the coming weeks as well.
The man of mystery, Mr. Countercolumn, asks, when thinking of chassis as part of the suspension, is there much gain in using chassis braces / bars?
Yeah, in general, you want to have the chassis as stiff as you can. When your chassis starts to flex, that's basically an undamped system. You know, with the spring, with the coilover spring, you have a damper that's controlling that, so you can have control over those kind of motions that the suspension is traveling through. If you have a softer chassis that is allowing some deflection in the chassis because it can't keep up with those spring rates, then you've got an external factor in the system that you can't properly dampen. So it's kind of hard to describe, but when you drive a chassis that's not as stiff as a more modern car like an FRS or even the FK Civic, you'll notice that the older cars will tend to be a little bit harder to control at the edge, and a lot of that's just because you don't have control over what's going on with the chassis as much as you do with the more modern cars.
Our very own local Evil Sino Anthony asks, do I need to provide my strut casings for some front coils? So we get this question a lot from actually TE and KE Corolla chassis guys. Will your AE86 system fit my car? And the short answer is you kind of need to find out for yourself, because all those cars, some come with the Corolla top hat bolt pattern, some do not. So you kind of got to find out for yourself. The other thing too is on the hub itself, sometimes the backing plate that holds the caliper bracket may be different bolt patterns. We do not want to cut and weld here. We want to offer you a brand new comprehensive system. So if you were to put the AE86 system on your older TE or KE chassis, we would rather you convert to AE86 front brakes, or another option we've offered is that we can get another company to offer you like a KE or a TE specific top hat instead of modifying your chassis or modifying our camber plates.
Yeah, if you guys if you guys notice the 886 camber plate that we offer doesn't bolt onto the car, reach out. We do work with a local company that can make a really nice camber plate that will fit onto our system.
DC5 Twisties, thank you for joining us on the Instagram Live again. This would not be an Annex Instagram Live if there was not more than one DC5 reference. Polyurethane bushings or hard rubber bushings, which would hold longer? Thoughts on sphericals?
Okay, I like that. That's a hard one for me. I feel like a quality rubber bushing is pretty similar to a quality polyurethane bushing in my experience. Longevity wise, I think poly actually lasts longer than any of the options, including stock. Has that been your experience too, Ezekiel?
So there's one key thing is that a lot of modern cars, it's not solid rubber. Like if you know cars with cylinder deactivation, there's actually a motor inside the bushing, the engine mount, or maybe a part of the chassis bushing that'll vibrate to dampen out cylinder deactivation. Or a lot of Euro cars that actually have liquid filled bushings, and those things, like, you install them wrong and they'll go out like on your road test out. So it's not that simple. I would say depending on what chassis too. Like I've noticed every single generation MR2, they always have problems with the rear toe links. So that may be like you may need something heavier duty like sphericals, or like a harder durometer poly bushing for those rear toe links. So I think that for me, that question, it really depends on what chassis you're looking at.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then holistically, we typically want to use either a higher durometer rubber or a suitable durometer polyurethane bushing if it's a road going car, or even a track car where we may not want a Heim in case that arm has a chance of binding while it's articulating. But in general, in my own experience with this was I had polyurethane on my AE86 race car, and that was great for the street. I loved it. As soon as I started putting R comp tires on it and upping the spring rate for track use, those were not keeping up. I could definitely feel the extra flex in the steering that wasn't there before when I had lower grip tires. So that made a lot of sense to go to a Heim joint. And because it's a track car, I didn't have to worry about the Heim joint wearing out from mileage. So it kind of depends on your application.
JMac AE86 joined us, and he's also local to us in the Bay Area. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your purchase of the Fast Road Pro for the AE86. We really appreciate the support, Jesse. Counter Column asks, could there be an approach to modernizing AE86 suspension similar to what Maximum Motorsports does with Mustangs? Tell Grant it's A. Rosario.
Oh, it's Alex. Okay.
Yeah. You got to tell us, Alex, that you have a Corolla in the first place. I think Tyler...
He doesn't, actually.
Oh, he doesn't?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Are you familiar with what he's asking, Maximum Motorsports?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a company. So I went to college in Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and Maximum Motorsports was one of the premier aftermarket tuning companies there that manufactures parts. They focus on kind of like what Battle Grudge does for 86s. They focus on Fox body Mustangs. I think newer Mustangs as well. They have all kinds of cool solutions for racers, and yeah, they did some pretty cool stuff updating the suspension on those to be more modern. And I feel like we're doing similar stuff with the 86s or other older cars that we did develop Annex for by using more modern valving curves based on some of the stuff that will typically come on a bolt-on shock absorber, like some Japanese shocks, like TRDs or Tokikos. So I think we're definitely upping the game in that sense, and yeah, it really helps to make the car feel more drivable in day-to-day use.
Mr. Ricky BRZ asks, can I bring my car there and let you guys choose which product is best for my car and the purpose in the future? I think if he's asking if you're local in the Bay Area, can he come by and get like a consultation?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. If you have questions about setup or what route to go, we really encourage you to drop by, and we can kind of show you the facility and consult with you mainly on what your options are. I think picking a suspension can be a little bit daunting if you haven't had a lot of experience trying different products, or are able to design suspension like we do. So we would love to be able to talk with each of our customers and kind of help them figure out what's going to be the best path for them and what's going to bring them the most joy, right? As Marie Kondo says.
That Marie Kondo reference threw me for a loop. We have 17 people. After you mentioned Marie Kondo, 2 people dropped off the live, so no more of that.
You love tidying up, Zekel. You should totally.
So for you 18 viewers right now, thank you all for joining us. We are doing a topic on setting up tuners, tuning dampers, springs, and links today. C.N. Is it bad to go too stiff? Taking everything away from coilovers, i.e. bushings and spherical all around?
Scott Malloy would say no. He's one of the competitors and also helped with 8.6 Drive Challenge events and organizations. But I think that's also kind of his nickname, is he's really well known for loving high joints. Our opinion is like, yes, you can definitely go too stiff. Even for track use, for example, if you pick a spring rate and a shock that's too stiff for the type of surface that you're driving on, and by that I mean, like, does the track have a bunch of large berms? Does it have like dropouts and chances where there's G outs and topography like that? Then yeah, you'd want to have a softer suspension setup in terms of the valving and the spring rates and the anti-roll bars and all that to get the best performance and time out of it. And of course, even more importantly, is if you're driving on the street, you want to pick the right spring and damper package for that as well. If you have too stiff, then you're not even going to get the maximum performance out of the tire because you'll overload the tire too quickly. I've got a personal example for this. We've got a prototype set of Club Spec Pros on my FRS right now, and I do not have race tires on it. I have some Nexen summer tires, and the CSPs are overloading my tires for sure. Like I would have more grip if we went back to the Fast Road Pros on there. However, if we go to the track and actually put our comp tires on there, I would much rather have the CSP than the Fast Road Pro if I have a really, really sticky tire. So it really comes down to what you're trying to do with the car. I know this comes up a lot, and we're happy to field all the questions you guys have on how to pick the right suspension setup. But that's probably the most important thing, is understanding how you're going to use the car and getting the right parts for that.
Dennis Bike asks, do you guys make suspension setup for the 8th gen Honda Civic Si chassis? And Rob says, yes, happy face. So yes, we do have a Fast Road Pro and a Club Spec Pro, which is our club racer or race line of suspension for the FA Civic chassis. And
yeah, luckily we got to have Rob's input. He is driving on the first set of Club Spec Pros that we made for the 8th gen Civic, and his feedback was great. We incorporated that into the design and learned a lot about front wheel drive Honda tuning.
Rob, Destiny the S2K, responds to both you guys. Night and day better over BC Racing with the same spring rates. I love it. Rob, you forgot to also mention that it was magical, man. And Dennis Bike says, what do you think of the 8th gen? Because New Jersey, ? These roads are crazy, so I want something with comfort, but nice for race lines and track days. So do we. That pretty much sums up the company, is that I want something that's not going to break my back, but it's going to perform on the canyons or at my track day.
Yeah. We essentially started because we wanted to make a suspension that could try and do all those things. So tuning for potholes is something we spend a lot of time on. And also just all the kind of crappy surfaces that we'll find in San Francisco or Los Angeles. There's some truly horrific roads in America, unfortunately, and we have tuned the suspension Fastwood Pro to keep that in mind. And yeah, I mean, I think people are starting to feel that if you get a suspension from another country where the roads are very, very smooth, typically they'll be tuned for those countries' roads, and it may not be ideal for where you actually live and drive the car.
Yeah, when you said that, that just reminded me. We had a previous regular Annex Suspension podcast where one of the team talked about how in Japan there's so much money put into the infrastructures and the road system. That's why like even all the city street roads are so smooth. So, naturally companies out there would tune for it, right? They didn't expect, the American who lives on a country road or like a a city road in the Bay Area with craters to use their, you know, over, really high sprung, really high dampened coilover system, right?
I can only imagine the meetings they had between the product managers between two countries.
Yeah.
They're trying to convince Japan, like, no, really, the roads are that bad. Like
Yeah.
Japan's like, oh no, can't be.
Or like
this is the way.
Or like the quality of road, like bad in their mind, is not the same as bad in
it's like night
for
and
us,
day.
right?
It's
Yeah.
night and day.
All right. Dennis Bikes says in all caps, "Appreciate you guys greatly. Now I know where to go. Yes, come to us, Dennis. Shoot us a DM after this, and we'll get your order built right after we finish this. But you got to get your order in right now."
Appreciate the support, Dennis. We'll probably want to spend some time on the main topic too.
Yeah. So if we have about 10 minutes left in the Instagram live, and the topic today is how to set up and tune dampers, springs, and links. So we do not have any questions right now. Do you have any questions you want to ask the audience?
No, I mean, I'm happy to go back to Gabriel's main question. I've got some stuff written down about that. I think I really like this topic because we get questions like this really often from our customers. I bought your guys' suspension, or even I bought someone else's suspension. Where do I go from there? How do I know how to set it up correctly? What can I do to get the best results? I'll tell you some stuff that we do, and some of this may apply to you or not, depending on the types of tools and equipment that you have available. But you can kind of get an idea on like what you can try to do or what you're able to do to get the best results. So when we put a suspension onto a new chassis, one of the things, especially if it's a critical application like a customer that's racing and we want to get the best possible handling, one thing that we'll start with right off the bat is by putting the car in corner scales to see where it's landing. And this is actually a pretty important part of chassis setup. And you'll find right away that if you have what's called a cross weight that's not ideal, and ideal is 50% cross weight. If your scales are saying that you're off, even a small amount, like let's say if ideal is 50%, if your cross weights are showing 46% or something like that, you can definitely feel that. And I know cross weights and corner balancing should probably be a live stream all on its own, but I'll try to summarize it as best I can. You can think of the cross weight as you're not getting the weight perfectly even from the front to the back of the car, but you're trying to get the distribution diagonally to be an even amount. And the reason that's important is if you don't have even cross weights, your opposite corners, one of the opposite corners is going to have a higher amount of load on it than the other side will. So for example, a car with an uneven cross weight might have a higher weight on the front right corner and a higher weight on the back left corner. And what that does is it makes the car teeter-totter on that axis as it's driving around on the racetrack. And from firsthand experience, this can be pretty dramatic. My Corolla has a little bit of a bent frame. I bought it when I was in college, and it always had this handling issue where the car would understeer pretty badly going left and would oversteer pretty badly going right. We put it on the scales, and lo and behold, the cross weights were really messed up. We evened that out to 50%, and the handling was dramatically changed. We didn't change anything else really other than just adjusting the cross weights. Now it's even when I'm going to the right, or when I'm making right-hand turns or left-hand turns, the car handles evenly. So just getting the car into the corner scales to see where you're at is a really good first step. One part that people often forget to do is to disconnect the sway bars entirely because even if you disconnect one end link, you can have another one that fouls up. But you want to have just the suspension onto the corner weights, so you can see exactly what the shock absorbers and springs are what kind of loads are being put on that. And then once you adjust those cross weights, this is where having adjustable end links can help you really get it dialed in. The goal is to be able to hook up your sway bars and use the end links to have zero change to the cross weights on the car. So by adjusting the links of those end links, you can get them set up so when the car is sitting at level, there's no preload on either the front or the back sway bars. Having preload on the sway bars will make the car handle, so it'll start to understeer on a right or a left instead of being perfectly even. If you don't have adjustable end links, I would still recommend disconnecting the sway bars and then just hooking them up at the end. Hopefully it won't change your cross weights too much once you hook them up. If it does, then we should consider getting some adjustable end links. So the other part is, to try to get that even handling, it's also really important to have matched dampers. And I think that's part of the reason why, I know that's part of the reason that we spend a lot of time building shocks here to make sure they're even. If we have a set of shocks that are off by even 10% on the dyno, that's something that we can feel when we're doing our test drive. You'll kind of feel the car not rise and settle at the same speed. So those two pieces in particular can really help to make the car feel even out of the get go.
Rob has a question, and we have about 6 minutes. So if you 14 people viewing the live right now have a question, make sure to ask it right now, or else you'll have to wait until we do this again, and it'll never get answered ever unless you send us a DM or email. Then we'll answer your question. Rob asks, how important is ride height when developing suspension? I'd imagine your suspension is developed for a certain ride height.
Yeah, it is. So for Fast Road Pro, we'll set it up to mainly have a more of a usable ride height. So something that we think an experienced car enthusiast will be able to still get the benefits of having a lower ride height, but not have the car so low that they can't get in and out of driveways, or they struggle with like everyday life. For race stuff, it's a lot more objective. We want to make sure that we can maximize the amount of compression stroke as possible. A lot of our tracks out in California have really big berms, and it's really important to be able to soak that up. So for Club Spec Pro, we have a procedure that's needed when setting those shock absorbers up, where you adjust the height of the bump stop to be engaging right at the last minute before the tire is hitting the fender liner. And we designed our entire system around that principle, and that allows people to dial in to get the maximum amount of compression stroke that they can for their car, whether it has a larger tire package or a smaller diameter tire package.
Do you guys do suspension rebuilds for other brands? Asks C.N.
We don't rebuild other companies' shock absorbers.
Oh man, we only have 5 minutes and we have 2 very long questions, so we'll try to sum these 2 last questions up. Racing Passion 1, can you get the same comfort level of a twin tube with a monotube?
That depends. If the twin tube is not valved correctly, then that would be an issue by itself. There's a trade-off between twin tubes and monotubes. And actually, I think we're going to keep this one short because it's a little bit off topic, but
save that topic for next time. Ask us ahead of time and we'll make a whole episode about just that topic.
Yeah, okay, let's do that. I think it's better.
Our last question, again from John of JSP Fab in SoCal. Any comment on the effects of rubber bushings on lower arms causing preload or binding of the suspension? Some factory bushings are serrated on the ends and won't rotate when lowering a car.
That's a good point, yeah. So if you have a poly bushing set up on your suspension arms, it's a little bit more forgiving in the sense that there's no 0 point. Wherever you install it, as long as you've got plenty of lube on there, the arm should be able to articulate freely. With factory style bushings, they are usually designed to clamp in, so when you bolt that suspension together, it'll dig in and keep the center part of the bushing in place, and then you depend on the rubber being able to twist for the suspension to go up and down. And with that, if for example, if you install that arm and the car is, let me see, I gotta think about this. If the car is up in the air, right, and you install that thing and you torque it up to spec, you could have undesirable preload on the suspension when it's lowered onto the ground. You could also cause the bushing to fail a lot sooner too. So for that style of bushing, it's important to tighten things down once it's at right height.
Yeah, that goes back to our one of the previous topics about which style bushing, right? Like rubber, poly, or Heim. So that's exactly what happens in a lot of Euro cars that are liquid filled bushings, is that people don't install them at the right height of the vehicle. And then once the car's back on the ground, it's like maxed out at one end or the other. And that liquid filled bushing will fail very shortly after. Evil X Gabriel joined, who has our Fast Road Pro on his Evo 10. Thank you so much for joining us, Gabriel. Please join us sooner next time, because we only have 2 minutes left of the Instagram Live.
I've got so one other thing I want to touch on is, a lot of times people ask us how they should set the dampers when they install coilovers, whether it's ours or another company's suspension. For us, we have in our quick start guide, we have some baseline settings that you should set the dampers to when you first start. But in general, I would say you don't want to set the shocks completely at full soft, but maybe in the middle setting or maybe slightly below that. And then go for a drive and set that evenly front and rear on the vehicle. Go for a drive and see how that feels. After that, adjust maybe 1 or 2 clicks, depending on how many clicks your dampers have. If it's something like 40, then you probably need to adjust more than that. But you want to make a noticeable increase in firmness or tighten the damper on one end at a time to kind of see what those changes are doing in isolation, so you can kind of get a feel for what's going to give you the best kind of what you're looking for. And also, that's a question that comes up too. Some people will ask, like, okay, I can do that, but how do I know when it's right? In general, you want the car to, when it hits a bump, you want to settle reasonably quickly. You don't want to have several oscillations afterwards, but you also don't want the car to be crashy as well. If you hit a large bump and the car is like making noise and it's slamming down and not bounding back up, that can also be bad too for performance and also comfort and longevity on the car as well. So you want it. You want that suspension to move. At the end of the day, the suspension is there to absorb bumps, right? So you want to let the thing articulate and allow it to absorb those bumps, but and settle quickly. But don't overdo it, and also don't have it set too loosely either.
And on that bombshell, thank you all you guys for joining us on the Instagram Live. We'll try our best to do this once every 2 weeks. We are still overloaded and understaffed, but we would still love to. We love doing this, so we are doing our best to try to do this once every couple weeks. So yeah, thank you guys again. We're going to close up, and yeah, any other questions, make sure to ask them ahead of time, either in the comments or Instagram story. You can even send us an email, either Grant or Ezekiel at annexsuspension.com. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Have a nice holiday weekend.